Hey, I'm glad you're here. If this is your first time, you're like, what in the world is going on? Yes, we are, in fact, talking about sex at church. Yeah, we're going to talk about sex at church through the end of the school year. Some of you are going, man, that's a lot of sex. There's a lot of sex in the Bible. We're not going to look at every instance of sex in the Bible. That would take years and years and years. But we are looking at, specifically the reason why we call this Sex to the Max. And again, I told you this last week, I want you to be able to enjoy the fullness of God's gift that is sex. But the only way that we can do that is if we do it kind of how He set it up for us. So we're going to talk more about what that looks like tonight. Let's jump into this first slide. I think it's the question slide. Oh, yeah. So if you have a question, you can click on that QR code, text it. Now, I'm not going to get these in real time, but I'll have those for next week, right? So here's the questions y'all submitted last week. I'm not going to answer all these tonight, but there's 2 or 3 that actually go really, really well with our lesson. But again, you can use that QR code. In fact, you can put that QR code back up there, Jordan, if you want to. You use that QR code to send me a question. Now, some of you weren't here on a Sunday to say this. Some of you decided to test the, hey, is this really anonymous thing? And yes, it really is anonymous. I don't know who submitted these things, but there are at least 2 of these that involve the F word. So, yeah, I'm not going to track you down, but you do need to know this. Kate sees these before I do. So some of the grotesque things that were said, she read those. I don't want to read those things either, but I sure don't want her to read that, okay? So, for real, you can ask anything you want to. If you don't know the right words, that's okay, but I promise you the F word is never required. Make sense? Is that fair? All right, very good. Okay, so here's the stuff you did ask that we're going to answer this week. Again, some of these go with next week's lesson. We're going to hang on to those. You can submit it if you want to. I promise, before the series is over, we will answer everything you ask. So the first question is, why are we doing this? And there's like 3 question marks, but that was pretty fun. Are very well, in 2 slides we're going to answer that, so just know that that's coming, okay? But there's lots of reasons why we're doing this. But one very big one, I'll show it to you in a second. The second question is, what is sex? Now, some of you might be going, well, that's a dumb question. But it's actually not, because there are some pretty significant and important definitions of sex. And it's not just when a mommy and daddy really love each other kind of thing, okay? That's like a fun little joke, but sex does have a definition. So it's the voluntary touching of someone else's genitals. It doesn't, by the way, there's a difference between sex and intercourse. Intercourse is the actual specific when a penis goes inside of a vagina. That's intercourse, okay? But anytime you are intentionally touching someone else's genitals for the purpose of, listen, this is important, for the purpose of sexual stimulation, whether it's your own or theirs. Now, I say voluntary. Sex and rape are not the same thing. Sex and molestation are not the same thing. We're going to get more into that next week. But you got to know that. They're not the same thing. Not at all what we're talking about, although we are going to talk about that because sadly those things happen in our world. But sex is very much a voluntary thing. But it involves touching skin to skin of the genitals. If you don't know what genitals are, you can go home and ask your parents that. But yeah, your sexual organs, your exterior sexual organs for the purpose of sexual stimulation. So I don't mean like you bumped up against somebody in the hallway. That's not sex. Okay? It's intentional. It's voluntary. Voluntary on your part and voluntary on the person of who's receiving that touch. All right? That's sex. We'll get more into that later on. And then what exactly makes me want to have lust or temptation? Well, there's lots of things that involve that. We're going to look at that from the scriptures, actually. But there's a difference between lust and temptation. And there's also, this is pretty substantial, there's a difference between noticing someone who's beautiful or somebody who's good looking and lust also. It is perfectly 100% harmless. It's even good to see someone and go, wow, that person's really nice looking. Wow, that girl's really beautiful. And I can tell you that, so, okay, raise your hand, girls, if I've ever said to you on a Sunday or Wednesday, you look beautiful today. Several of you, right? Okay, that was not a lust thing. I come to you and go, TJ, that's weird. How many of you guys have I said to you, wow, you look like I studied today. You look really sharp. Several of you, okay? Just acknowledging someone's dressed well or they just look really good today. That's not a lust thing. But when you look at another human being and you go, whoa! Specifically, and it doesn't have to be verbal, by the way. When you look at another human being, you might not say anything, but you might go, boy, I want to fill in the blank. That's when you crossed over into lust. Does that make sense? Again, acknowledging someone's beauty, acknowledging, this is a cool thing, acknowledging God's handiwork. That's a cool thing, but it very quickly can cross over into lust. When you tell someone, specifically when you tell someone you're not married to, even if you meant to encourage them, you're like, boy, I really like the way that your fill-in body part here looks. Now you crossed into lust. And by the way, it doesn't have to be just a boy to girl thing or girl to boy thing. Yeah, there's homosexual lust as well. We'll get to that here in a couple of weeks. But what causes you to cross over, we're going to look at this. It's all about how the enemy has attacked us and ruined, I can't say ruined, has sought to ruin God's gifts that he's given us. Okay, let's jump in. Here's our next slide. Actually, I think this is just the opening slide. George, still with me? There you go. Yeah, so there's our question slide. Here's what we're talking about this week. We're talking about why, where, and who. And actually, I forgot to alter this. Right? It's actually supposed to be why, whoa, and who. Right? So again, we asked the question, why are we talking about sex? Check out this slide. This is why we're talking about sex. We're going to go over some stats here. Some of these you might know. Some of these you might have gone over in your sex ed class. Some of these you may not. So up top on the left, we'll get down to some Texas stats. In 2020. So you ought to know this. Most of the time when you're looking at statistics, it's usually 1 or 2 years old. For whatever reason, it takes us a long time to gather statistics and then make sure all those statistics are correct and then release those to public. And then there was this little thing, I don't know if y'all ever heard of it, there was that COVID thing, right? So specifically on medical statistics, lots and lots of those either didn't get documented or they were even more slowly documented because scientists and doctors kind of had their attention elsewhere. But now the downside to that, this is actually pretty scary. In 2020 and 2021, lots of places in our country stopped testing entirely for STDs. Because what were we testing for? COVID. We put all of our time and attention into testing for COVID. Okay? Now, in 2020, just because we weren't supposed to, touch each other or breathe each other or spit on each other, whatever, did people stop doing that? No, not even a little bit. So, yeah, we were spreading COVID like wildfire, but guess what people continued to do? They continued to have sex and spread STDs. And then for a year or two, nobody was getting tested for them. Which is really scary because that means there are lots and lots of guys and girls, but it's really scary for girls. Girls, because you have an internal sexual system. There were lots of people that inherited an STD and don't realize they had it for a substantial amount of time. So that's really, really scary, that time frame. But as far as the other part that's maybe not so scary, although I suspect if any of you girls ended up pregnant, you would be pretty scared, right? So in Texas in 2020, and this number's gone down each year, which is a good thing. In 2020, 22,641 girls that were under the age of 19 had a baby in the state of Texas. So in case you're wondering, that sounds like a lot. We're actually ninth in the country on pregnancies. The state of Arkansas, believe it or not, is number 1. So, woo pig, I guess. There you go. You know what that's an Arkansas saying, woo pig suey, right? That's not a stat to necessarily be proud of. I tell you that the stat and I didn't put this on here, the stat that I learned today about Texas that really made me sad. We actually lead the country in the number of females who get pregnant a second time before their 19th birthday. That's our number 1 stat. Again, that's not necessarily a stat that we're looking to be on top of, okay? So that's one of the big reasons why people your age are still having sex and getting pregnant all the time. So this is why we're having these conversations. Now, also, this is really, really cool. I told you that number went down, and it's gone down consistently every year for several years. Part of the reason that number's gone down is education. Not only in churches, but actually starting in the year 2000, we started having lots more conversations in school, not just about what sex is, but also the importance of abstinence and the power of abstinence. And as we continue to teach those things across the country, not just in Texas, across the country, the number of births began to decrease. So having these conversations is helpful. All right. Number 2, though, 1/3 of internet usage is porn. Okay, how big is the World Wide Web? It's massive. Okay, how many of you have been on the internet today at all? Just about everybody. Okay, now I'm not going to back to how many looked at porn. That's not my next question, right? But they do know this because they can track this. This is crazy. You think about all the people in the world that use the internet every single day. 1 out of every 3 people that get online, and every moment they get online, 1 of every 3 people, they're doing it to look at pornography. So 33% of the time they jump online, they're looking at porn. That's horrendous, right? And they do that all the time, every single day. It's crazy. I think the other stat that I read, it was every 5 web pages that are developed for the internet. Like, you can Google anything, right? Like, there's a web page out there for even like the dumbest little things. 1 out of every 5 web pages that are created are porn sites. Of all the stuff on planet Earth, this is what we go to the most, all right? The other age, the average age of exposure to pornography is now 10 years old. Now that's average. Can we all agree 10-year-olds don't need to be looking at pornography? For sure. Zero reason why 10-year-olds should be looking at porn. That's the average age, which means there are kids much younger than the age of 10 who are already either, not necessarily, it doesn't mean like they're Googling sex stuff, it means they're being exposed to pornography. Some of y'all have heard my story before. I never saw pornography until I was 15 years old, and the only reason I saw it at that point was because I was in somebody's house, and a guy walked around the corner with a Playboy and said, "Hey, TJ, look." Right? That was when I was exposed to pornography. Again, wasn't something I was seeking out. Someone showed it to me. Because we have cell phones now that are connected to the internet, this happens all the time in elementary school playgrounds every single day. Some kid, not all the time, but a lot of times it's a big brother shows a little brother something, the little brother takes it to school and shows all his friends, and off and away we go. And that number keeps getting younger and younger and younger. This is not cool. One of the most popular forms of pornography is sex. Now, I'm encouraged by this status. This is still awful. For years, the number one search term on all pornography sites was teenage sex. Meaning one of two things. Either teenagers were jumping on porn sites and they were trying to Google pictures of their peers or other teenagers, but also what was happening a whole lot was there were lots of adults that were Googling, I want to see the youngest male or female I can imaginable, and basically worldwide that aged 18, which is still a teenager, and so that's the search term they punch in there. And again, thankfully, that's no longer the number one search term anymore, and it hasn't been for a couple of years. I'm grateful for that. But you gotta know there are in fact people that are, whether they would think, no, I'm not preying on teenagers, I'm just looking at pictures, but those pictures affect your brain in awful, awful ways. And they absolutely affect the way you see people in real life. So you gotta notice, like, people are, in theory, they're after you. Some of them are intentionally after you, okay? Next one, the red. 89% of couples don't wait for marriage. 89%. So 1 out of 10 couples, and again, these are surveys, so it's it's going to fluctuate some, but only 1 out of 10 couples make it to marriage without having sex. And the average age of marriage now is like 26. This is a hard thing, right? And you can see some of those stats about the percent. Now this is important. When I said 7th and 8th graders, 13% of 7th and 8th graders have had sex. That doesn't mean just 13% of 7th and 8th graders, not all 7th. Does that make sense? Just 13%. Now, I'm not thrilled that even that many 7th and 8th graders have had sex, but you kind of see that goes up. 9th graders, 30% of 9th graders, 41% of 10th graders, 54% of 11th graders, 64% of 12th graders. And then you notice there is an under 13 age. There are really, really young kids already involved in sexual activity. By the way, that and pornography are very much tied together. You heard the phrase monkey see, monkey do? When you see these things, you're prone to think, hey, I can do that, or I want to do that. And if no one tells you you shouldn't do that, they're going to, right? Keep going around. Guys, this one's important too. 70% of TV shows geared towards teenagers, so 70% of shows that are geared towards you involve sexual situations. And by the way, that number gets way higher when it comes to music that's geared towards you. You think there might be an agenda behind that? Probably. But if this is, remember we talked about this, why I'm doing the challenge with you. If this is what we're putting into our heads, whether it's stuff we're listening to or stuff we're watching, it's going to affect the way that we view the world. And this is stuff that, again, it's not like I'm watching stuff that was meant for adults and I'm watching it. This is stuff that's actually pointed towards y'all. There are 20 million new STD cases in America every single year. And that's like, 20.2 or whatever, but it's consistently for the last decade and a half, 20 million new cases. Half of those every year are teenagers. Well, actually, it's teenagers in early college years. And a lot of those are coming from college-age students. But that's still a lot. And you do need to know this. 40% of sexual active teenagers have an STD. So if you are having sex, you probably do need to go get tested. For real. Like that's a big, big deal, guys. 15% of students have had 4 or more sexual partners. Have y'all ever seen not a sexual comparison chart, forgotten the phrase. It's terrible. Little chart that shows every time you have sex with somebody else has sex. In some ways, they try to show you like you've had sex with that many people too. It's your sexual exposure chart. That's what it's called. Yeah, like it's like a kind of a gnarly looking pyramid. And every time you have sex with somebody, if they've had sexual partners too, like you become linked to them as far as what you're being exposed to. So imagine, again, it's 15%. That's not a huge number. But if you're one of those people, and now you've been exposed to someone who's had 3 or 2 or 3 or 4 partners, all of a sudden now your number of exposures gone way, way up too. Right? Almost done. Almost as many teenagers avoid sex because of fear of pregnancy or an STD as they do for religious reasons. Now some of you might be thinking, well man, who cares as long as they're avoiding it? And I do care, that is important. But I'm talking to a bunch of teenagers who have congregated in church because I'm assuming that you're here because you at least kind of care what God has to say about your lives. And I want your motive, and God wants our motive to be, Lord, I want to please you above all else. So yeah, there's lots of things to be scared of in life, and there's lots of things to be aware of in life, like STDs and pregnancy and sexual exposure and becoming a stat and how can I wreck my brain and all this other stuff. And we're going to look at some more of that tonight. But the biggest reason why I want to pursue sexual integrity is just that Jesus, I want to be honorable to you. And you've given me some guidelines, and I want to follow those because I love you so much because of what you've done for me. I want to express my love to you and how I live my life according to your standards. I'd love to see that stat go way, way up because a bunch of Christian teenagers, that's the reason. That would be the first thing you say, hey, why aren't you having sex yet? It's not just I want to get sick, I want to have a baby. It's, I love Jesus too much to disobey. And I don't want those things too. Make sense? All right, let's keep rolling. Sex. Sex is everywhere. I just like this meme. Yeah, you're never going to look at Buzz and Woody the same way. But for real, guys, when I say that you live in a sex-saturated culture, you absolutely live in a sex-saturated, it really is everywhere. And by the way, even if you didn't have those stats, if I just said true or false, is sex everywhere, I suspect all of you would have said, no, that's true. Whether it's, again, at your schools or wherever you like to hang out or whether you're online. And by the way, it doesn't matter if you're on some kind of social media form, there's still lots of at least sexual type things on Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat, and all those places, right, too. It really is. It's everywhere. So since that's true, we got to talk about it, right? So let's keep rolling. I just really like this little, I say it's a meme. This is really cool satire. So you see the guy on the left, right? This is a doctor. He's getting ready to do surgery. And if you look at him, and if you've ever looked at it like a surgeon, and you look at all the different ways they cover their bodies, right? And then specifically, surgeons cover their bodies up from head to toe, usually in multiple layers, because they don't want to be exposed to fluids of someone who's sick. And so we do cover up from head to toe. And this is what the CDC says, hey, this is what you need to be covered up with if you're going to be exposed to someone else's fluids, particularly if they're sick. However, simultaneously, and thankfully the CDC does more than just this now. When this was written, all they would say is, hey, if you're talking to a kid about having sex, just give them a condom. Which is one little bitty piece of, not rubber, but one little piece of article of clothing that only covers a portion of a male's body. And still not everything that's going to come in contact with someone else either. And it really doesn't make sense, right? Like if you're looking to be protected, I promise you a condom's not going to be the thing to do it. It helps. I'm going to lie to you and say it doesn't help. It helps, but it's not the smoking gun that it's proposed to be. All right, let's keep rolling. So there's nothing new under the sun, so we're going to jump into the Bible, okay? So everybody jump over to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 19. Verse 9. Says this. Says this. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new, it's already been in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any. All right, right ahead. Here's why I bring this verse up. It might be really easy to think, good grief, like my life is so hard, and it is hard. There's no doubt about that. And there are things that you deal with that aren't exactly what your parents deal with. But you got to know this. Sex has always been a big deal. It's always been rampant. It's always been everywhere. We just had to deal with it in different forms and fashions. Again, like your parents didn't have access to pornography because of the little thing that everybody carried around in their pocket when they were growing up. But pornography was everywhere, I promise. There were lots and lots of people having lots and lots of sex all around them. So, there's nothing new under the sun. Genesis 6:5. Anybody flip there yet? So I get there faster. Genesis 6:5. This is actually really sad. It says, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved his heart. Okay? This is right before God talked to Noah to set that whole scenario up. God was looking at planet Earth, and he was already, like we're 6 chapters into world history, and it's hundreds of years have passed, by the way. But nonetheless, 6 chapters in, and already God is saying, oh my gosh, like these guys, it says specifically, all they ever think about are ways to defy me. You can assume very safely that a lot of that involves sexual activity. Again, that's nothing new. But you know, okay, well that was a long time ago. Jump over to 1 Corinthians. Chapter 6, and I told y'all we're going to be looking at this passage and passages around it a whole lot. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, we looked at 18 through 20 last week, but the preceding verses are pretty interesting. Verse 16 says, or do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one body with her? For as it is written, the two will become one flesh. That he who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with them. So flee from sexual immorality. And I alluded to this last week, but this is why we're saying this. In the church at Corinth, Paul is writing to believers. He's not writing to random people walking down the street, although Paul did talk quite a bit to random people walking down the street. We saw that in the book of Acts. He would engage in conversations all the time. But he's actually writing to people at the church of Corinth, some of whom he himself led to Christ. And he says, hey, guys, stop it. Stop having sex with prostitutes. Can you imagine, like, if Pastor Eric started one of his sermons on Sunday morning that way? Would you suddenly be paying attention, like, really, really closely? You might also be going, what is he talking about? Who's having sex with prostitutes? Lots of people at the church of Corinth were doing that. And here's the thing. Like, they thought that was normal. Because in their culture, there were prostitutes everywhere. They genuinely thought this is how you worship their God. Well, they thought they had to worship their new God because their old gods, that's how you worship the God. Like you would go to a temple and you would have sex with a prostitute in order to worship them. I'm bringing this up simply to say, even in the church, even a long time ago, we've been dealing with promiscuity and sexual activity that's not pleasing to God. So again, if you might be thinking, dude, seriously, why are we doing this? Because it's always been a problem. And the only way to change it is for us to hear from the Word of God and to hear specifically, okay, God wants us to do these things. God doesn't want us to do things. And you can't say, it's just common sense. Because it's not always common sense. Someone has to teach you these things. So that's why we're dumping the scriptures. All right, let's keep rolling, Jordan. So where do we begin? If the world is a sexual dumpster fire, and I wish I had time to tell you about the time I started a dumpster fire. I'll tell you that story at Chick-fil-A, okay? I did, in fact, start a dumpster fire one time. Well, yes and no. Like, after it was over, I was like, I totally started a dumpster fire. At the time, it was really scary. But after it was done, I'm like, hey, I did that. Like, you hear that term, dumpster fire, you're like, do dumpsters actually light on fire? Yes, they do. And it's awful because it's full of trash and grease, and it just burns and burns and burns and burns. Right? So since we live in a sexual dumpster fire of a world, we go, okay, well, what do we do here? The answer is we go to God. Like, duh, that's why we're here, TJ. Again, you can't just look at stats and everything else. But we've got to go to God for his answers. So let's keep rolling. Number one, since we're going to God, you've got to know this. This really is an important foundation thing. And you might say, again, this is common sense, but you got to hear it. Okay? Number one, God made sex. This was God's idea. I promise you, Adam and Eve weren't walking around planet Earth, the Garden of Eden, and going, hey, I've got this thing, and you've got this thing. Wow, looky there. And God in heaven wasn't going, no, 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 no. Okay? This was God's idea. God created humanity to mate in that way. Here's why this is important, though. Since God made sex, that means by default, sex in and of itself is not a bad thing. Although sometimes it feels like a bad thing. And sometimes it should feel like a bad thing because of the way that you're using it or the way you're being exposed to it is a really, really bad thing. But jump back to Genesis chapter 6. I want you to see this. This is actually where, and again, you talk about awkward. Okay, your youth pastor's talking about sex right now. That's weird. God's actually talking to Adam and Eve about sex. So some of y'all remember this, maybe you don't. When Becca and I got married, we had premarital counseling, like lots of couples do. And premarital counseling inevitably ends up like there's a sex talk in premarital counseling. And not just, hey, are you having sex? If you are, stop it. Like in some cases, particularly for couples that are virgins, someone actually just explains kind of like one final time, like here's how this is going to work, right? What was awkward about that was the fact that the person doing marital counseling with us was Becca's dad. Okay? So you can imagine Becca like wanting to crawl under her house, and the whole time I'm thinking, dude, I'm not doing that. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's your daughter? Like, no. Right? Like, this is just weird. Now, that was weird for us. Now imagine having this conversation with God. She's like, that's really weird. I know, except here's what you got to know. God doesn't think it's weird to talk to him about anything, and God certainly doesn't think it's weird for you to talk to him about sex, because again, it was his idea. Look what he says to Adam and Eve. This is kind of cool. Start at verse 18. Then the Lord God said, it's not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him. Remember, God made Adam first. God makes all the animals first. Then God makes Adam. Then God says, hey, Adam, go name all the animals. And Adam's literally, he's looking around at all the animals, going, hey, this is cool. There's the giraffe, there's the elephant, there's the seahorse, there's like all this stuff. Adam got to name it. It was probably an exhausting job. But Adam was seeing, it wasn't like God only made one donkey and one horse and one dog and one cat. Like God made lots of these things, made them in pairs. And so Adam's looking around the world going, okay, there's 2 cats and 2 giraffes and 2 whatevers, 2 kangaroos, but I got nobody. And God goes, yeah, I know. Then God thumps him, knocks him out. Keep reading, this is kind of cool. Now out of the ground the Lord had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens and brought them to man to see what he would call them. Whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. And the man gave names to all the livestock, to the birds of the heavens and beasts of the field. For Adam there was not a helper to be found. Just told you all that. So the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall upon him. Again, God thumps him. Boom. God, and deep sleep to fall upon the man. And while he slept, God took one of his ribs. So this is the first surgery in human history, by the way. It's kind of cool, right? First surgery, God removes one of Adam's ribs. Oh, by the way, if somebody ever tells you that men have one less rib than females, that's not true. Adam had one less rib. Holy moly. We're good. So, God takes his rib and uses that rib to form Eve, which is really kind of cool. And there's something really tender and sweet about the fact that God literally made somebody for Adam. Right? So my ringtone, if Becca ever calls me and my phone's not on vibrate, my ringtone is just this really sweet song. And it's called A Waltz for Jennifer because the guy who wrote it for his wife. But it's a perfect line. And I just use the chorus. But the chorus is, I'm so glad that God made me. Well, that sounds selfish. That God made me for you and you for me. That's just a really sweet line, right? Because I believe with all my heart, there's not a doubt in my mind, God made that lady for me and me for her. Now, I got the better bargain out of that deal. Right? But he made us for each other. Even more so, this is what God did for Adam. God made Eve out of one of those ribs, kept them close. And this is what's really cool. After he finishes making ribs, so that the rib that God had taken from Adam, the man he made to a woman, and brought her to the man. Again, this is kind of neat. This is, if you want to call it, the first blind date. Right? Adam, I want to introduce you to someone. Adam meet Eve. Eve meet Adam. Right? And actually, Adam got to name Eve, which is kind of cool. But literally, it says God brought Eve to him. So imagine, this is a gift from God. Hey, Adam, I did this incredible thing for you. Here you go. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, that sounds kind of awful, like to just offer Eve up to him. But again, Eve would have been pretty excited about it too. God not only made him, but immediately, well, for starters, Eve didn't have to do all the work that Adam did, right? Eve got to be born, if you want to use that phrase, and then immediately God said, hey, here's a husband. Congratulations. Enjoy. This is a really cool, sweet thing. Then the man said, this is at last. Guys, by the way, I love this line. Look at verse 23. Adam says this, and this is, girls, this is how a guy's supposed to respond to you when it's time for you to be married. And this is, by the way, if I ever get to do any of your weddings, and I hope I do, because that's a really fun thing, boys, this is part of the marriage vows you'll use when you speak to your wife. But Adam says, this is at last bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Finally, I found the one that God made for me. It's really sweet, right? Finally, I have mine. She will be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore, now this is God speaking again. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and they weren't ashamed. So, God just explained sex to them. Hey, you two are together. Now, God was their father. They're going to be the first father and mother of humanity. But it says, hey, from now on, whenever a couple gets married, they break off from mom and dad. They go and they form their own unit. They're going to become one, both spiritually, and yes, they're going to become one physically. That's why sex is so unique in its process, why God made our bodies the way he did. Like, we're literally physically one. We become spiritually one. It's a really, really cool thing. But then also, like, there's this sweet little line, too. It says they were both naked and they weren't ashamed. Now, if for some reason, Kylie, okay? Okay. So, if for some reason, Sam, I'm going to pick on you for a second, okay? Sam, you fell asleep here, and then all of a sudden you woke up, so this is a nightmare now, right? You wake up, and you're sitting in youth group, and you're naked, and everybody's not. Right? Again, this is a nightmare scenario. Are you going to freak out a little bit? You'll be feeling a little bit ashamed. Going to run away, a whole thing, right? Because like, listen, I don't want any people to see me naked. Some of you might need to look at you're looking at your own self naked, much less seeing other people naked, much less wanting other people to see you naked. This is really cool. This is how it's supposed to work. When you get with your spouse someday, and you're married in the right way, it's a beautiful thing. Like, there is no shame. At least there's not supposed to be. Now, there's lots of things that mar our view of ourselves and our spouses, and so sometimes there still can be shame. But God's intention was, hey, like, when you get with your spouse, even like, you're going to be so connected, even when you're most vulnerable, literally, like, you're naked. There's nothing to protect your physical self. You're not going to feel any shame. This is the intention. You're not going to feel any shame because of what God's done. That's a cool thing to have somebody that you're that tight with. Like, even, if I had to guess, even your very best of best friends, like, there's still at least a handful of things that we just keep to ourselves because we've got to have something. But God set up in a way for you to have a partner someday. Not only have this kind of relationship with God, but also have another human being where you don't have to hide anything at all. It's super duper cool. So again, God made sex. Number 2. Yeah, thank you, baby. Number 2. God made sex for procreation. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. The first rule that God gave Adam and Eve was have sex, make babies. He actually told them that before he told them not to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's kind of a fun rule, right? What do you want us to do, God? Go have sex. Okay, anything else? Nope, that's it. Enjoy creation. This is your job. Have sex, make babies. Okay, awesome. Number 3, God also made sex for pleasure. So again, I want you to catch this progression. God made sex. It was his idea. Yes, God made sex for the sake of procreation. So God did say again, fill the earth, make babies, fill the earth. This is a cool thing. But God didn't just make sex for the sake of having babies. God also made sex for pleasure. It was very, very kind of him to say, hey, here's your job, and it just so happens your job is going to be a lot of fun to do. How many of you have a job right now? Like you go and work and get paid?
I'm getting a job.
Okay, fair enough. Is your job always fun? No, sometimes it's fun. Okay? Newsflash, sex is fun. I know that's shocking to you, right? This is the reason why lots and lots of people do it, because it is fun. By the way, sex is fun even when people do it improperly. Now again, like when I say sex, I'm talking like voluntary sex. I'm not talking about assault and that kind of stuff. Voluntary sex is fun. So God gave him this rule. You need to do this. And just so happens, like, this is going to be a fun thing. You're going to enjoy this thing that I've given you to do. That's actually kind of, by the way, it's how it's supposed to work when God gives us tasks to do. Not always, but most of the time, it's something that we're going to enjoy. Because God's made us to do these things. So God made sex for the sake of pleasure. If you took a picture of that, go home and read these verses. Here's what I want you to catch. I did this by design. Okay? Yeah, and it is fun to look at the pictures. I picked those goofy-looking people for a reason. The pictures are going to get better, by the way. Proverbs chapter 5, verses 18 through 20. Okay, Solomon is talking to his son, and he's saying, hey, son, listen to me. You need to enjoy sex. And he actually gets, not explicit, but he actually gets in detail. He actually wants you to enjoy her body. That's a gift for you. And enjoy it like for the whole of your life. This is a really, really cool thing. And yes, like again, you're thinking, okay, this is awkward. Dad talking to his son, but it even says, like, yeah, son, enjoy your wife's different body parts. That's one of God's gifts to you. Song of Solomon, chapter 5 and chapter 8. Just in case you're wondering if it's sex just for dudes, no, it's not. Both of those passages, that's the wife talking about how much she enjoys her husband's body. Again, I say it's explicit. If we understood all of Hebrew poetry, we'd be like, holy cow, that's really seedy stuff, man. Except it's a wife talking about her husband. In fact, the funniest verse, I'll even tell you about this one, chapter 8, verse 1, the opening line, and I'm telling you this because you're going to go home and read this, you'll be like, I don't understand. She says to her husband, man, I wish you were like my brother. Hang on. Wait a second. No. So let me explain this. In the Hebrew culture, in the ancient culture, PDA, and public displays of affection, were seen as big no-nos across the board. Even if you were married, it was like, no, you don't do it. You don't hold hands, you don't kiss, you don't do any of those things. But Solomon's wife, whispering sweet nothings to her husband, says, like, I wish you were like my brother. Because the one exception to that was if a brother and sister were walking down the road holding hands, or if a brother gave his sister a hug, no one blinked. If a sister leaned over and kissed her brother goodbye, it was like, oh, okay, that's no big deal. So she's saying, like, I wish people would look at me like they look at like, when I'm with my brother, because then I can do to you in public whatever I want. And then again, she begins to express, actually, she says, first I would kiss you in public, and then I would take you to our bedroom. And you're like, whoa, that's in the Bible. Yes, that's in the Bible. Again, guys, the point I'm trying to get you to catch is, like, sex in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's a good, awesome, godly, God-honoring thing. Because God made sex for pleasure. And then the last one is this. I like this picture too. This is a really sweet picture. God made sex for protection. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. Paul says verbatim, actually the first verse says this, hey, if you're able to not get married, don't. Because if you're able to not get married, like, if marriage isn't something you want, that's a good thing. But if you do want to get married, or if you're a person that's very lustful, and by the way, it's not just said that to men, it's also said that to women as well. If you're someone that burns with lust all the time, get married. And then when you do get married, have sex. Do it a lot. And then he actually, talking to husbands and wives, obviously, says specifically to them, hey, the only reason you should stop having sex is if you two are fasting from everything for the sake of prayer. You stop having sex, and then after you finish that fast, go back to having sex again. And the reason why we do that is for the sake of the protection of the marriage. There's some really cool biological stuff that goes on inside your body. We're going to get more into this next week, but there's literal awesome things that happen in your brain and happen to you physiologically. Every time you have sex with your spouse, physiologically, you're falling in love with them a little bit more every time. It's really like how God designed your genes to match with his genes, or your genes with her genes. It's really, and I don't mean like the genes that you're wearing inside your body. The chemical imbalance, not chemical imbalances, the chemicals that are reacting to one another. It's incredibly cool how God designed us, right? The reason why God said that is that it's a way to protect your marriage. Not just, I need to have sex with my husband a lot so he won't look at other women. That's a different conversation. We're going to talk about that too. But we're going to protect our closeness, the fact that we have this thing that nobody else can or should be doing with each other. It's a really, really remarkable thing. In the military, there's this thing called mandatory fun. Like they literally have they call them mandatory fun days. And so the Army says, hey, everybody get your family, come to the park, we're going to have fun together. Now, have your parents ever said something like you, hey, we're all going to go out together and we're going to have fun together? You're like, no, we're not. Yeah. Mandatory fun. Like, this is one of those mandatory fun things that's actually fun. Right? Yeah, this is pretty cool. All right, let's keep going. We're almost done, I promise. God is not anti-sex. This is also really fun pictures. Yes, that's Tom Brady crying. Tom Brady cries a lot. So, yeah. But again, it's not just dudes that get excited about the fact that God's not anti-sex. Again, it's his idea. Girls get excited about sex too. You got to know that, by the way. Don't buy the lie. This is important. That it's just like sex is just a dude thing. Dudes have a super high sex drive and girls are kind of like, that's not true. There are some females that have higher sex drives than guys do, all right? But you got to know that God's not anti-sex. One more, Jordan. Since God made the world, this is what I want you to catch tonight. We're going to land on two things. Since God made the world, that means two things. Number one, that means God gets to make the rules about how sex works. So if I was the one who created Monopoly, that means I get to make the rules of how Monopoly's played, right? And I would totally start with the Ninja Turtles side. So one day I'm going to own that version of Monopoly. Or if I were someone who designed a car, and I would design a Mustang because that's my favorite car, I would know how sex is best supposed to operate because I'm the designer. That's not hard to understand, right? For sure. This is how God operates with sex. He gets to make the rules about how sex is supposed to be used, but it also means that he knows how it's best done. Again, the series is called Sex to Max because I want you to experience the fullness of God's gifts. And the only way we can experience the fullness of God's gifts is if we do it the way he's told us he ought to. Notice I've got the word authority up there. Authority means like he's the one. Like nobody knows more about sex than God. But the reason why nobody knows more about sex than God is because he is the author of it. Period. It's really cool. All right, I think this is the last slide. Two more. Lots of reasons to delay sex. So we'll pull that one up next week. Here's what I want you to catch, guys. Go to the next one, Jordan. There's lots of positive things that happen in your life. It's not just bad things that happen if you engage in intercourse, if you look at pornography. There's lots of good things that come in your life too, by honoring God's rules. But as you're thinking about this, please stay with me, guys. Please stay with me. Listen. As you think about this, it's really, really easy to go, oh my gosh, like, I've already messed up. I've already looked at porn. I've already had intercourse. I've fooled around, and maybe I didn't have like a full-blown intercourse, but I've had other forms of sex. But I've just thought about other people in ways I know I shouldn't have been. Guys, I promise you that God does not want you to wallow in shame for what you've done the entirety of your life. You should feel some shame. But what we do with that shame is what matters. And what we need to do with that shame is you take that to Jesus. I don't know if you know who the guy on the left is. That's Roger Goodell. Okay? He is the commissioner of the NFL. So tomorrow night is the NFL draft. I don't know if you've ever watched the NFL draft or not. It's pretty interesting. So every team gets to make their pick. But Roger Goodell always starts it. So Roger, as the head of the NFL, Roger Goodell is the authority on it. So he gets to make a bunch of the rules. Since he has become the commissioner of the NFL has doubled in value. Every single NFL team, including the really lousy ones, all of them make more money. And all the players make more money. And more people are watching NFL football than ever before. By every marker, Roger Goodell has been a good commissioner. But tomorrow night, when Roger Goodell walks out on stage at the draft, like at first they're going to announce, hey, the draft is starting, and everyone cheers. Like there's thousands of people in the crowd watching the draft. They cheer, and when Roger Goodell walks out on stage, he gets booed mercilessly. And it's kind of funny. Like people are just, boo, I hate you, boo, you're awful. And I couldn't tell you all the reasons why people hate Roger Goodell outside of the fact that, generally speaking, we just don't like the boss, right? But the thing is, again, Roger Goodell, by every standard, Roger Goodell's a great commissioner. This is the way people see God and sex. Boo, God, I don't like your rules, I don't like law. By every measurable standard, the things that God says to do when it comes to sex is good. It's a beautiful thing, and when we do them, it ends up being better than what other people experience with sex. So I want you to hear the phrase, Jesus is better. Like Roger Goodell's a good commissioner. Jesus is an incredible commissioner of your life. And what you got to catch is this. Please hear me. If you are someone who's already messed up, like anything, porn, sex, whatever. If you're a person that's done these things, you got to know, man, I promise you with all my heart, Jesus still absolutely loves you. And you have not, you've goofed some things up, but you've not ruined your life forever. There's nothing that Jesus can and won't fix and redeem and change in you. Yeah. What you do with that shame you might be feeling as a result of our conversation tonight, I promise you that Jesus can and wants to handle it with you. It's a super fun verse. Again, going back to earlier in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul gives us this list. It starts at verse 10. Paul gives us this list. Man, a bunch of you people in here, you're adulterers, you're fornicators, you're homosexuals, you're prostitutes, you're liars, you're haters, you're violent, you're awful. But then, you're like, dude, this is a horrible church. And they were a pretty crazy church. But then Paul turns the corner and he says, hey, you know what? A bunch of you used to be those things. But because of Jesus' work in your life, you're now different. And this can and is and will be some of your stories. So I'm going to pray. If you need to talk to me about anything we talked about tonight, Rebecca, any other adults in the room, by all means do. But you got to know, please hear me. And grace is real, regardless of how you goofed up. God can do cool things in your life. Jesus, bless your word tonight, please. Please, please, please help your kids get it. We love you, Father. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.